Coming up next on the GeoTrek podcast.
It blew up. I mean, it literally blew up. Back in COVID, when everything shut down, there was no place to get the information that we were providing. And that was one of the things that was in the back of my head. If we could open a venue that people can get this information, we're likely going to be the only place they can get it from. And we were. And as a result, we started getting connections globally.
Welcome to August, everybody. It's late summer in the Northern Hemisphere and the time of year when we expect tropical cyclone activity to really ramp up in the Atlantic Basin, as well as the Eastern and Western Pacific. The scientific consensus points towards an active Atlantic hurricane season this year. As we approach the heart of hurricane season, a trusted source of information you can turn to is the National Tropical Weather Conference. Hey everyone, I'm Dr. Hal. Welcome to the GeoTrek podcast. This is episode 39 of the podcast, titled the National Tropical Weather Conference with Alex Garcia and Tim Smith. This conference has an in-person meeting in South Padre Island, Texas in early April every year, as well as weekly video conferences that you can participate in every Wednesday morning. Our guests on this show will be Alex Garcia and Tim Smith, two leaders who are the driving force behind this conference's success. You're going to love this podcast if you have an interest in hurricanes and tropical weather, as well as broadcast meteorology, emergency management, or operational meteorology. Hey, a bit about the podcast if you're new. GeoTrek travels the world to find stories about the relationship with people and nature. Our stories investigate the impact of extreme weather, disasters, and hazards on individuals and community. Our goal is to help you better understand how the world works so you can take actions to make yourself, your family, and your community more resilient from all the extremes that Mother Nature can throw at us. Hey, before we get into this episode, we have a favor to ask of you. We'd really appreciate if you would subscribe to this podcast on your favorite podcast platform. Your subscription helps us mark progress, which enables us to make more professional partnerships moving forward and ensures many more episodes of the GeoTrek podcast in the future. Well, hey, let's kick off our shoes and jump into the sand with Alex and Tim. We've got a drink for you at the Beach Cabana, and we can't wait to hang out and have some great tropical fun as we explore the National Tropical Weather Conference together with you. Well, hey, let's introduce this week's guest. Alex Garcia is a seasoned media professional and educator. He spent over 30 years in education as a public school teacher and university professor. He is chief meteorologist at KABB TV in San Antonio and the CEO of the Storm Science Network. Tim Smith is chief meteorologist at KRGV Channel 5 news team in the Rio Grande Valley of South Texas. A native of Batesville, Indiana, and graduate of Indiana University, Tim worked at several radio stations in Indiana before heading for Texas in 1981. He's the vice president of the Storm Science Network, an educational outreach organization which puts together the National Tropical Weather Conference at South Padre Island in April of each year. Alex and Tim, thank you so much for coming on the GeoTrek podcast. You know, you guys have so much experience in broadcast meteorology. I have to ask you, how did you become so interested in the weather? Like, can you trace this back to a big storm or big weather event that you experienced when you were growing up?
I guess it would start way back in the early 60s. That gives you a hint of how old I am. Hurricane Carla. Went right through Hurricane Carla. Lived in Victoria, Texas. And it went right across the eye, just past 10 miles east. So that kind of sparked that old weather interest in me, and it stayed with me, both that and science all the way through.
Wow. Sometimes, one huge storm, especially when we're kids, that can change our perspective for life,
It does. I can hear the storm right now, and I still see the imagery back from that time frame as well. One of the things I remember is a big tree being lifted next door and dropped down on the neighbor's house.
And for our listeners not familiar with Carla, it was a Category 4 hurricane that hit the central Texas coast. Not only was it intense, it was also really geographically large, huge impacts along the central and upper Texas coast and even in Louisiana. Tim, what about you? What really got you interested in weather, climate, and physical science?
I grew up in Indiana, which is not hurricane country at all, although they seem to get more rain from some of the storms that, moved across that part of the country eventually. But it was the 1974 tornado outbreak that went across that part of the country. Xenia, Ohio was hit, and I was about 40 miles from Xenia, Ohio, just across the state line in Indiana. Little town that I lived in right next to us called Hamburg, Indiana, like hamburger without the was devastated by a tornado that day. People died in Hamburg, and the only building left standing in town was the church, part of the church, and one house. The rest of the town was just destroyed. And so weather became a hobby. I didn't anticipate it being a profession.
Yeah, that part of the Midwest, though, every year you're under the gun for tornadoes, hail, damaging winds. So probably the spring was a time that you were keeping your eye to the sky up there. Alex, what are the different kinds of jobs you've had in the field of weather, meteorology, broadcasting? Maybe you could walk us through a little bit of your professional background.
If we're just looking at broadcasting, I started in radio a long time ago when I was about 16. Did a lot of radio, was a rock jock, did all kinds of radio programming for many years. That paid my way through college. I used to work at 4 different radio stations at the same time, and I had to carry little cue cards with me to remember what station I was working at, so I wouldn't say the wrong call letters. Eventually, I just kind of fell into TV by accident. A friend of mine was doing TV weather in Victoria, and he had to leave to go take care of his mom. Asked me to fill in. I filled in a couple of times. The third time, he said, "Look, I'm not coming back. The job's yours." And that's how I ended up in television. So I figured at that point I'd better go back to school and get my degree or certification or something. And from there, I ended up in San Antonio, and here I am.
Wait, we have to go back to this rock jock story. So were there like there were like radio programs then that you hosted?
Yeah, I was actually a DJ, a rock jock from 7 to midnight in Corpus Christi, KRYS Radio.
Was this like people could call in and then request a song or something like that? Yeah.
Yeah, I mean it's the real stuff. Not like you hear today. Everything's recorded and it's put on tape and it's recorded in somebody's basement. No, I was actually sitting there in a control room with the 2 turntables because I spun records for a while. We had all the carts up in front. We had all the commercials on one side. We had reel-to-reels that we recorded other network programming. And so, yeah, it was all off the top of your head. The commercials were on postcards. You got the text, you got the bullet points, and you read the spots. And then when you went live, we actually have a trailer. So it's a big 30-foot trailer. They built a control room in there with all glass. The best thing of it, they took it out to Padre Island, and we're there live on Padre Island doing our radio show, which is the best thing ever.
Oh, that is fascinating. That interaction you had with the local community, and just like you said, you were reading the commercials and getting to know the different sponsors and stuff. That's pretty cool.
You just had to make up the commercials out of your head, but they had to be 30 seconds and not over. Otherwise, the GM would get a little upset with you.
That is fascinating. Tim, what about you? What are some of the different jobs you've had in broadcasting? Anything related with meteorology?
I think you'll find this is where our career paths kind of start to parallel because I was a jock as well. All through college at Indiana University, worked at 2 different radio stations at Indiana University. One of them was a freeform FM. We were on cable. That was it. And you could play anything except top 40. So I really learned to appreciate all kinds of music in that radio station. And we could get maybe 1 call a night, maybe if we were lucky. And usually it was a station manager saying, I said you could play anything, but maybe not that. so, and then after college, went back to my hometown of Batesville, Indiana, and became news director for WRBI, the hometown radio station. We called it the Tri-County News Authority. I preferred the Tri-State News Authority because we were Indiana, Ohio, and Kentucky, which we almost reached. So yeah, I did the mornings. I did all the news in the morning. I signed the radio station on the air at 5:57:30 a.m. Had to go in and play the national anthem and then hit the network news at 6 and then do a 10-minute local newscast at 6:05 and then did all the programming up through 9 a.m., which was news, the farm report, the stock market from yesterday, and played some music mixed in with it, and then kept doing news all day long. But did that for about a year. And then an opening came in television at KRGV in South Texas. And a friend of mine was working there. And she said, you should come down here, but the job opening is to do weather on the weekends. And I said, well, ever since that tornado outbreak, I've kind of been a weather hobbyist. I can learn to do weather. So I did a video demo in the basement of a hospital in Indianapolis with maps drawn on poster board. The map of the United States, a map of Indiana. I took the highs and lows off the newspaper map. There used to be weather maps in the newspaper, and then stood in front of a camera and did a weathercast and sent it to the news director at KRGV, and he said, "That's creative enough. You got the job. Come on down." And that was 1983. I was a weekend weather guy, and not long after that, I became the chief.
Guys, let's transition to talk a little bit about the National Tropical Weather Conference. What is the goal for the NTWC, and maybe a little background, like how did it get started?
Oh man, what a story to tell, right?
Great story.
I will let Tim tell the story because I always end up telling the story. So I'll let Tim tell the story this time.
Well, we met, I don't know what year it was. We were at the a weather conference in the Bahamas. And there was a Texas contingent that kind of hanging out together. But Alex and I hadn't met until we were leaving the Bahamas. And we were at the airport, and I went to get something to drink and came back, and my wife says, "You need to meet this guy." I was like, "What guy?" "Oh, this Alex guy." And so we started talking. It turned out we had a lot of things in common. We were doing a lot of things, a lot of similar things, doing teacher workshops and things like that. He was doing them in San Antonio. I was doing them in the Valley. We thought, well, we should do this together. And Alex was about 10 steps ahead of me in that sequence, but we were doing some of the same things. So we came back and we're doing things, and then that Bahamas conference ended. We went a couple of years without, and we realized that we missed the information. We missed that opportunity to meet with the scientists, to meet with the director of the Hurricane Center and Dr. Klotzbach and Dr. Gray and all these experts in the field. We'd gotten used to doing that every year, and all of a sudden it was gone. We said, well, we put events together, and Alex said, well, we should do our own. And I said, well, I live close to South Padre Island. I know some people there. We could probably, make it work. So we started looking at the options, and we talked to the people at South Padre Island, talked to hotels, and finally put it together and decided, yeah, we can do this. Alex had been doing a couple of serious meteorological events in San Antonio already, with bringing in people like Bill Reed. So Alex already had those relationships, and that really is what made it go, because we could go to Bill and say, "Bill, who do you recommend we bring in?" And Bill had some great suggestions and great contacts. And so it was born. The first one was at the East Grand Beach Resort on South Padre Island in 2013, I believe. And there were more presenters than listeners.
Yes.
I think we had probably 30 presenters and 25 attendees. But the presenters were kind enough to sit in the audience, so it looked like there were more people. And it grew from there. So that's kind of where it got started.
Yeah, we started out with 10 broadcast meteorologists. The last year we finished up, we had like 110, 150.
Prior to the pandemic, yeah.
Prior to the pandemic.
And now we're rebuilding, yeah.
There was a big focus on broadcast meteorology, but I've noticed now there's a mix. There's a lot of people that are not broadcast meteorologists. Has this changed a bit over time? Let's talk a little bit about the last, 9 years of the conference.
I've tried to diversify it out. We initially started out with broadcast meteorologists, but I saw there was a need for just emergency managers beyond the National Hurricane Conference, which they usually go to. That's got like 4,000 or 5,000 attendees, and we're looking 130 at max, 150. And so with our conference, you get an opportunity to sit down and talk with the presenters. You get to have lunch with them, you get to have dinner with them, you get to interact with them a lot more. And so I started kind of spreading the topics out so that we could bring in the emergency managers and the other meteorologists that are not necessarily in broadcast, but are in emergency positions, either with corporations or with businesses. And so that's what helped kind of spread it out a little bit. But our main focus is still on broadcast, because we still have the live shots. We're the only conference that does that, where you can come in, get a live shot, and send it right back to your newscast that same day with one of the experts that we have. So that's one of the unique things about us. But it was a purposeful thing to diversify.
So it seems like there's really an intentional focus on broadcast meteorology and other folks that do like operational emergency weather stuff related to tropical weather, right? This might be someone that works for a county or parish or a city or even maybe private sector, but it seems almost more on the decision-making side or the operation side. Would that be correct? As opposed to, I've been to some conferences. I was at a conference where there were like 54 academics, and it's all about their published papers, and there's value in that, but it felt very different than broadcast meteorologists or people doing like real-time operational meteorology.
Right. when you're doing the academics, it's good, and occasionally we have an academic presentation, but our conference is more focused on trying to get information out that can be in turn sent out to the community. So we try to focus on that way, because our primary thing is to educate the people that come to our conference so they can turn around and educate the people that they deal with on a daily basis.
Yeah, that's true. And, a lot of times the weather person in a community or a city, they're often the main science person that's educating the masses, on that local TV station or radio. So I see what you're saying. You're helping educate them so they can go back and educate their audience.
Exactly.
So I heard about this conference, I think back in 2016 through Lou Fincher, the late Lou Fincher. He was always had a passion for emergency management, especially with industry. He was like, Hal, you have to come to this conference. I was working for a small nonprofit during those years, and I was actually in Texas, and the nonprofit was like, sorry, we don't have a travel budget. I said, no, it's in state. It's not that far. They said, we don't care. We have no travel budget for you. So I heard about this for a couple of years. I couldn't come, and then I was in Florida. So finally 2020 came, and I registered, I was accepted, I got my ticket, I was so excited, and then COVID hit. I was like, I am never going to get to South Padre Island. It was like 4 or 5 years I was trying at that point, and finally when I had the ticket in my hand and COVID hit, so I was like, oh man, the whole thing's going to be canceled, I won't even get to connect at all. And then you guys launched this virtual, the weekly virtual video, which I couldn't believe, because COVID really hit hard mid-March of 2020. The conference is usually the first week of April. I didn't think there was any way that there would be any kind of conference that year, but you guys kind of somehow turned this into a national, video conference quickly. Could you tell the story behind that? How did that happen? How did you even pull that off in such short time?
Well, it took a lot of work. A lot of research. I knew that if we were going to flip it in that direction, it had to be good. It couldn't be just little boxes on a screen. It had to look like broadcast. It had to look like network. But the problem was, back then I couldn't figure out how do we bring in people on separate areas without having expensive live views at everybody's home. So I did a lot of research and came up with Zoom. Zoom back then will allow you to bring in people like we are now, but I can isolate the video feed. So I've got a series of laptops. Every laptop is connected to Zoom, and that becomes my camera or my feed. So I can bring in people. So I learned how to do that. Then I figured I needed a really high-level broadcast switcher to be able to do this, but those things are not cheap. I had to go find out, where am I going to get this from? And then how am I going to work it? Because I'm used to doing the smaller ones, not these 4ME type things. But I did learn how to do that, taught myself how to do that. Lots of YouTube stuff. Did get the confirmation that we have money to buy this. So I bought it, put it all together. In the meantime, I'm telling Tim, we got to do this, we got to do that, get this thing set up. So he's working like crazy, getting the other things set up for us, while I'm working on the technical side of this thing, trying to make it happen. And then at the same time, I do meteorology, I do all of this, but I also, and Tim's a musician as well. We're both musicians. I'm an artist. I do 3D graphics. I do 2D graphics. I create all kinds of stuff. So everything you see on the National Tropical Weather Conference, that open and the close and the animation, that's me created on my little laptop that I'm looking at right now. Using After Effects and 3D programs and Premiere Pro and Illustrator and Photoshop and all these other things. So I knew I had to get all of that done. So it was a whirlwind of creating program assets, even before we sat down and said, okay, this is what we're going to do, how we're going to bring it in, and then getting the people to say, here's the link, come into the link. Don't call me anytime before this, because if you do, you're going to interrupt the program that I'm running right now. So I had to make sure I had people set up to call in at the right time. And we pulled it off. It worked that first time around. And I think that first time that we had Phil Klotzbach come on, we had something like 60,000, 70,000 people all on at once. But back then we didn't quite figure it out. At least I didn't figure it out. I just sent everybody the link. So it's like where we are now, everybody's in that link. So everybody was
All those little
talking
boxes, yeah.
in boxes and coughing and the whole bit. And I had to mute people who didn't mute themselves. So we finally figured out, like, yep, smart person here. Let's not give that link to everybody, but let's just give them the link where this is where we're gonna be live. And Tim is my friend that goes over there and watches the feed so he can get the questions so that we can put those over. That way there's only those of us who need to be on this channel, and there's no coughing and muting and all that other stuff going on. And
one of the things was that you got it all set up on Zoom, we're good to go, and then National Hurricane Center and the government says, oh, we're not allowed to use Zoom.
Yes, exactly.
Wait, what was that about?
I don't know.
Go ahead, Alex.
It was one of those things that they said, look, we can't use Zoom. And so, okay, so we go to Google Voice. Let's go do that. Let's make that happen. So it was a whole learning process of how to bring everybody in on Google Voice again and get that going. So we have those two options, and then we also have Skype. Skype is a little off and on, but we tend to stay with Zoom. And I've got a Zoom account that allows us to do HD, which means our feeds look a little bit better than everyone else's in the lower resolution. But yeah, it was crazy. I mean, getting the technical stuff going. If I could turn the camera back around so you could see what I'm looking at, you'd be like, holy mackerel.
I get the feeling that both you guys are still catching up on sleep from 2020.
We kind of are.
Sleep's overrated.
Yeah.
I mean, that's a lot of work that you both put in.
Yeah, we're planning the next year's conference already.
So for those of you that haven't seen the National Tropical Weather Conference, it looks incredibly professional. What Alex is talking about, it opens with animations and you're like, whoa, it draws you in. And then all of a sudden there's a screen with a speaker, a couple of people on a panel. And like he had mentioned, Tim Smith is watching the feed where people can text in questions or type in questions they have. And then those are shared with the guest. I mean, it just flows really well. This is a weekly broadcast, usually on Wednesdays at 10 o'clock a.m. Central through hurricane season and beyond. It's a fantastic job you guys do.
It's been a lot of fun. Doing it has been fun, and we pick topics that we think will be interesting to as many people as possible, but things that we're interested in too. Stuff that we enjoy learning about, and so that makes it even that much more fun to do it because it's stuff that we're fascinated by, but yet it serves a purpose. Reaches out to hopefully a relatively large audience, and we can judge by the questions that are coming in. There was a time when we were having people text questions. Alex put my cell number up there.
Yeah.
And they were texting questions to my cell phone. Just you go through iterations as you learn the technology. And Alex has done an amazing job and always has with technology. And so it makes it easy on my end. I just read questions,
Alex, you mentioned when you switched to video during COVID, there's Phil Klotzbach giving the seasonal outlook, and you have 60,000 people that are tuned into this. So, I mean, what did the COVID adjustment and COVID crushed a lot of businesses, but then other businesses and organizations found ways to actually explode their reach. And it sounds like that's what you guys did with National Tropical Weather Conference. I mean, how did that change what the audience looks like, the audience numbers, the interactions? I mean, how did that all change during the COVID era?
It blew up. I mean, it literally blew up. Back in COVID, when everything shut down, there was no place to get the information that we were providing. And that was one of the things that was in the back of my head. If we could open a venue that people can get this information, we're likely going to be the only place they can get it from. And we were. And as a result, we started getting connections globally. I mean, we got connections from Brazil, from Mexico, from Puerto Rico, from all areas in South America. We've even got England, UK, Italy, Greece, where else there? Egypt. We're just global now in 61 countries. And that spread really quick during that first year. So it opened up our audience, it opened up us to our audience and our audience to us all through the globe. And it really helped spread who we were and what we do and the information that we were providing.
There's a statistician that talks about this topic of anti-fragility. The concept is when you stress some things, they actually improve. Like the human body, when you stress it with exercise, it actually improves it. A moderate wind will actually invigorate a forest fire, but it'll blow out a candle, right? So some things you add a little bit of stress and it actually improves it. Other things it destroys it. I mean, you guys really stand out as like a stressor was added and you use this to really help explode your reach. It's a really inspirational story, I think.
Yeah, it's exciting. Tim?
I think what it's doing for the actual conference, the in-person conference, is making it so much better because we've been able to meet, so many new people through these meetings that we hadn't met yet. And one person leads us to another, and we get suggestions from viewers. And it really, I mean, this is kind of how we met you, Hal. You kind of came in through this and started doing this. And all I know is when we finally met you at the in-person conference this year, you're taller than I thought you were going to be. but otherwise, I knew you already. We felt like we were already friends because we'd been doing this, and it really opens up the door to make the in-person conference even better because of the people we've been able to meet by doing this. So it really has improved the overall product, I think, significantly. Not that it was bad before; it was a good product before, but I think it's even a much better product now because of this.
Tim, I'm glad you mentioned the in-person conference because there's been so much focus on the success of the weekly video conference. Could you guys share a little bit about the in-person conference as well?
Sure, I can start with that. It's every year April. It's the first weekend-ish in April. Depends on a bunch of schedules. And we're in South Padre Island, Texas. We're back at the Marriott Resort again this year, which is really a terrific facility. And with the conference, we try to do a lot of things. We try to, number one, provide content that for the broadcasters, they can take it back and use in their hurricane specials. They can use it if a hurricane threatens. They've got the knowledge that they've learned through this conference that's coming from speakers like yourself, speakers like all the experts who come in, Phil Klotzbach and the director of the Hurricane Center, and all these experts that come in and make presentations. But we also try to make the conference fun for you. We want you to learn a lot. We also want you to have a good time while you're there. We always say, Alex is in charge of content. I'm in charge of fun. And so the content is always top-notch, superb. And we try to make sure you have a good time while you're here. We take you out to eat. We do different activities. We make sure there's just, a good time while you're there. Try to make sure you have good food, good drinks. And we even had our own custom-made beer this year. So how much more fun can you have than that, right?
Yeah, and we took that old Bahamas conference idea of a dine-around, and we brought it to South Padre, and it's been awesome.
Wait, could you explain that? What you mean by a dine-around?
Go ahead, Tim.
Sure. We work with restaurants. We'll break the group. Let's say there's 100 people. Break them down into groups of about a dozen, and take each group out to eat at a different restaurant. It's usually on Thursday night, and so. If you sign up for the restaurant you want to go to Gabriella's Italian Cuisine, then you get in the group that goes to Gabriella's. We put you in a shuttle and we take you to Gabriella's, and we've had amazing support from the South Padre Island community because Gabriella's pays for the dinner. We don't pay for it. The restaurant comps the dinner for our group. And if you want to have a drink, you're on your own, but they comp the dinner. And so we've got about, 8 or 10 restaurants that we use. And it varies because restaurants come and go, but there's a few that have been there from the beginning, like Gabriella's. That's why I mentioned them. That they take care of the dinner, they comp it, and they put on their very best show. So when you go in there, they're going to make sure you get a good meal and have a good time. And you're sitting there with Phil Klotzbach or Bill Reed or any of these people that you never would otherwise have the chance to see in person and visit with, the speakers at the conference, and you have dinner with them. And it just a dozen people. So it's a wonderful opportunity to meet and tell stories and learn. So it's just really a cool evening for everybody.
Yeah, that dinner this year was one of my favorite parts of the conference. I mean, just because you got an extended time with, the people at your table, you got to really know people really well.
Yeah, and all of the speakers are so gracious about doing it. They're anxious to go too. And we encourage them to not, we don't want everybody from the Hurricane Center to go out to eat together. We want them to separate so they can be with different people. So they're not, we don't want them all at the same table. We want one here, one there, one here. So they get the chance to visit with more people. And they're all so good about doing it. It just turned out to be a really great experience.
Yeah. Alex, what's your favorite thing about when you actually get in the conference, you're engaging with people? What stands out to you that makes this conference unique?
Wow. I think probably the cadre of people that we bring in, the experts that we bring in. We have some regulars, but we try to bring in new experts every year. And the fact that you get to talk with these individuals, at least while Tim and I are preparing it, we get to talk to them before the conference, and then we get to meet them, and then have lunch with them, have dinner with them. But I think it's exciting to be able to introduce them to the attendees, to see that excitement on their face, to say, oh, look, I'm standing right next to Ken Graham. This is awesome.
Yeah, the amount of personal interaction with some of these like famous people that we all hear about in the hurricane community, I thought that was a really cool part of the conference.
The Josh Morgamans of the world, you know.
Yes, the Josh Morgamans. I always think it's kind of cool, like when I'm driving to work, my phone rings and I'm looking down and it says Ken Graham or Josh Morgaman or Phil Klotzbach. And it's like, who gets those calls, you know?
Yeah, that is pretty cool. Hey, when you guys, look into the future with National Tropical Weather Conference, what are you hoping for, say, in the next 5 to 10 years?
I'm hoping we're still going in the next 5 or 10 years. I'm hoping that we increase the number of in-person attendees. I'd like to see us get up to maybe about 150, 175, no bigger than that, because I'd like for it to stay a small but yet unique conference. I'd like to really get more experts in and maybe expand a day so that we're able to deliver more topics and more information for people.
And I agree with that. We call ourselves the biggest little conference in the industry because we're small, but yet we're big. We reach a lot of people because of the broadcasters who can spread the word back out. And of course, it all takes support. We've got some great support that helps us do that. Corporate supporters who are part of it. We'd like to increase that. And by increasing that, then we can increase the attendees and keep the cost down. We try to keep the cost reasonable for the people who attend. Some conferences are so expensive, and we try to keep it to, once you're there, you're covered. Once you walk in the door, you're not going to spend any more money. You're done. We take care of everything, and so we want to keep it that way, and keep it good. One of the things we talked about on the social side, and I think this is one of the best parts of the conference, is the social hour, the hospitality suite. Because the hospitality suite that's open every night is a chance for everybody to come together and sit there with a drink in their hand and just talk. And it's the loudest room in the hotel because there's, if there's 40 people, there's 30 conversations going, and it's loud. But it's a chance for Hal, you and I, to sit down and talk over a cold drink, or for Ken Graham and Jamie Rome to talk with the broadcasters from Louisiana, and it's just loud, and everybody goes, and it's just a great opportunity. And that, I think, as long as we can do that, it'll help grow the conference because it gives people an opportunity.
And the way this was set up, you guys had like the restaurant bar that's open air right out there on the beach with live music. And I mean, that's as the sun's setting, people are just hanging out, walking the beach. And then after it gets dark, people were going to the hospitality suite. It's like the whole evening was just set up to be so social. I thought that was really well done at the conference.
There's on the last night of the conference, after the farewell party, it always ends with fireworks. And the first year we did the fireworks, I'll never forget. We were at Clayton's Beach Bar, and we walk outside. We time it perfectly, so we're all done. Okay, let's step outside. We go outside, and there's fireworks, and the people are coming up, patting us on the back, saying, "Oh my gosh, you have outdone! I can't believe you got fireworks for the conference. Oh, you have outdone yourselves. This is crazy." And about that time, the DJ comes on the big PA and says, "Don't forget, ladies and gentlemen, every Friday night at Clayton's at 9:15. I was like, shut up.
Yeah, we just timed it out.
We need to find a way to distract that DJ, and then people will be like, okay, this is insane. They even have their own fireworks display,
We had them convinced for about 2 minutes.
Yeah, we did. It was funny. It really was.
Guys, with your decades experience in science communication, weather communication, what advice would you have for young broadcasters, science communicators? I mean, are there any big pictures that you'd like to share from your experience, not only with the conference, but just in your broadcast meteorology experience as well?
Wow, that's a loaded question.
I know, and it's very broad. If there's one or two things that come to mind, I think it would help some of our young scientists out there.
Well, how can I say this? The landscape is changing. Let's put it that way. The landscape is changing. The landscape of communication, the way we do it, it's not what it was 5 years ago. It's definitely not what it was 15 to 20 years ago. We are a lot more socially connected instead of turning on a radio a long time ago in the 50s when you got your information, or in the 60s you turned on one of the big networks. Well, those big networks are there, but there's a lot of other networks too. So everything has changed in the way that we get information. And so if you're just getting into this, it would be a really important thing for you to do is to get a good grip on what the best method, the best platform of communication there is. And it's no longer what it used to be. So start thinking out of the box to be able to deliver the information that you have today.
That's a good perspective. So instead of just looking back at the way things have been done, maybe assessing the present and looking to the future too. Where are things going, perhaps?
Yeah, it's there's a good saying. A friend of mine, Catherine Hayhoe, said that we can't look in the rear view anymore to figure out where we're going, because where we're going, we don't know. We've never been there before. So we've got to look out of the box.
No, I totally agree. I think Marty McFly, or wasn't one of the Back to the Future, I think had a perspective like that too, right? About really, it got, as a little kid, it got me thinking about the future. Great advice there, Alex. What about you, Tim? Any thoughts on that?
Well, I think, and I agree 100% with what Alex said. I think we're entering uncharted territory. We always have been, but I think now it's happening faster than ever. People are still watching the weather on television, but now they're watching more on their cell phone than on television. But I think ultimately, I like to think that being connected matters. Being connected, whether it's your social media accounts, whether it's even still on television, you got to be connected to the community, and that's really important. And I think if you look at, if you're in San Antonio, you want to watch weather on television, the guy to watch is Alex. Everybody knows, watch Alex Garcia. I like to think if you're in the Rio Grande Valley, the guy to watch, I hope I hope my name comes up somewhere near the top of the list. If you're in Lafayette, Louisiana, you want to watch Rob Perillo, because Rob is that connected guy. If you're in Myrtle Beach, you want to watch Ed Piotrowski, you need to be that person and, be at the top of the heap in your community. And you do that by being connected. And it's interesting, and I've mentioned those names because those are all people that come to this conference every year, because they understand the need to know and to get that step ahead of everybody else, to know that extra little bit of knowledge that will make them the one that's connected with the community. And I think that's really, really important, that you become part of your community, and whatever medium it is, TikTok, Facebook, Twitter, on television, for goodness sake, whatever it is, be connected. And once you're connected, I think, stay strong and keep doing it, and you'll be all right.
Yeah, there's something kind of funny I always think about when we're talking about connection. Tim and I went to Walt Disney World to do a little research one year. And so we are walking down, in Florida, in Orlando. Oh, it's Tim Smith. And so I'm laughing, and I said, oh, they got you. And 2 seconds later, oh, it's Alex Garcia. So, yeah, we can't even get away. We're that well connected.
So you go even all the way, 1,000 miles east to Orlando. You're walking around Disney, and people are going to know who you are, huh?
Yep, exactly.
Yeah, that's great.
You do it long enough, we were in Cabo San Lucas just a couple of weeks ago, and walking through the marina, hey, Tim Smith, what are you doing here? It's like, well, I'm doing the same thing you're doing. I'm on vacation. Leave me alone, Yep. But you can't say that. You got to say, I'm on vacation. Cheers, and be done with it. But yeah, it's happened in Madrid, in the airport in Madrid. It's just I cannot imagine what being a movie star is like. Because we can kind of get out of town. You might have one person, but think about a movie star. It's just, I can't imagine.
You can't get away. Yeah.
Yeah, it does show, though, your reach, and I think the reach, too, of broadcast meteorologists, that they're touching so many more people than they possibly realize, It's pretty cool stuff. Hey, do you guys have any last thoughts or any perspectives to share on these topics? Any last thing you want to share on this podcast?
Well, I first of all, thanks for having us on. We appreciate it. And we appreciate all that you're doing to help us with what we're doing at the National Tropical Weather Conference. I think, when you kind of came on as a guest a couple of years ago and have been a regular since, we love having you on, and you're a real important part of what we're doing. And I love the research that you're doing and the work that you're doing. I don't know where we're headed. I just encourage people, when you're getting your weather information, to make sure you're getting it from a reliable source. There's websites that are going to give you garbage, and you don't know that. Make sure you trust the source. That's so important. And because you can get bad information really easily. And so know where you're getting it from. Get it from a reliable source when you get it. We try to be a reliable source for you, but we're not, during a hurricane, you don't come to us for the latest bulletin. You come to us once a week for, what's going on now, but trust your source. I think it's really important.
Tim, I'm really glad you shared that perspective, because there's just been an explosion of apps and all these sources of, you hear people quoting, and I'm like, where did you get that? What, that doesn't align with the National Weather Service forecast at all, or whatever. There's just so much more sources of information out there. And like you said, we have to be careful and make sure what we're getting our information from is reliable.
Exactly.
It's so important. And there's websites that, and there's websites that put stuff out there, the 30-day GFS that shows a hurricane in the Gulf, and look out, it's coming. It's like, that has less chance of verifying, so just know and trust your source.
Yeah, thank you. Great perspective. Alex, any last thoughts from you?
Yeah, I agree with that. I mean, there's too many social meteorologists out there who have no background, who have nothing. They're just pulling stuff off and put it out there. So yeah, I agree with that. I echo that you need to have your source trusted, a very, very trusted source. And usually that's going to be the Weather Service, or it's one of us, your broadcast meteorologists, which is why we really focus on the broadcast guys, because we know they are the people that communities will turn to when the weather gets bad. That's the first thing, the first person they go to is their local meteorologist. So that's why we reach out there first.
Wow, what a great podcast with Alex and Tim. It was so great to get to know you guys better and learn the backstory behind the National Tropical Weather Conference. This was an action-packed episode, but I took away a few key points. Number one, the National Tropical Weather Conference is very intentional in its focus. It's bringing together broadcast and operational meteorologists, emergency managers, as well as science communicators. It is not focused as much on policy and academics, although some academics have sometimes come. So if you're passionate about science communication with a focus on tropical meteorology, this is a really great conference for you. Number two, the size and format of this conference really works well for people trying to network and build relationships. I think this past year, between 100 and 150 people attended the in-person conference in South Padre Island, and everyone is in the same presentation session, shares meals together, and interacts a lot. For the young scientists out there, look for this type of conference to help you build relationships in your career. I remember as a grad student sometimes going to these mega conferences with 5,000 people and often feeling lost. A smaller conference that keeps everyone in the same session, sharing meals together, really helps you network and build some deeper relationships that can extend well beyond the conference. Number three, I really like that Alex and Tim shared that perspective on how rapidly the landscape of science communication is changing. Social media has exploded opportunities for us to do broadcast on social media like Facebook and Twitter Live, as well as Instagram, TikTok, and many of these platforms that are popular, especially with the younger generation. It's amazing to see how much things have changed over time. I was obsessed with weather as a teenager in the 1980s. Back then, I had to wait for the tropical weather update on the Weather Channel 10 minutes before the top of every hour. If I missed the update, I had to wait another hour just for basic info like a hurricane's intensity. Of course, I grew up in Pennsylvania, so I didn't have the benefit of watching local tropical meteorologists like Alex and Tim in Texas. Then in the 1990s, the internet came around and enabled us to go to a website 24 hours a day to get weather information and, find out the latest info from the National Hurricane Center. Now in the past decade, everything has become so much more interactive. Imagine this. You can participate in the National Tropical Weather Conference weekly online, and this can be an interactive experience. You can send in questions in real time, and Tim Smith will ask them to the expert of the week. That level of interaction was unimaginable even a decade ago. I hope to see you in person next April in South Padre Island for the National Tropical Weather Conference. And don't forget, every Wednesday morning there's a virtual conference. I sit on the science panel most weeks, and so I get to interact with the guests. I do a lot of learning myself, and I hope to see you there. Thank you so much, Alex and Tim, for a great podcast and for all you do to bring together the hurricane community. Thank you to our loyal listeners for your support of what we do here on GeoTrek. And of course, a huge thank you to our GeoTrek production and marketing team, our team team members are Seneth Baker, Ashley Anderson, Jeremiah Long, Helen Sabato, Christopher Cook, and Amy Wilkins. I'm Dr. Hal. Thanks for listening, and I'll catch you on the next episode of the GeoTrek podcast.